In the grand story of World War II, we focus on the clash of armies and the thunder of tanks. But beneath that epic scale lies a darker, more intimate story. It unfolds not on the battlefield, but inside the home, where the very idea of a safe space evaporated. When law and order collapsed, civilians and resistance fighters didn't have divisions of tanks. They had what was around them. Their tools were ingenuity and desperation, and their weapons were often disguised as the most mundane features of everyday life. This is the world of the booby trap, a weapon designed for the quiet moments, engineered to turn the act of seeking shelter into a life-or-death gamble. And in this shadow war, few places were more perfectly suited for a deadly surprise than the common staircase. Think about it. A staircase is a natural choke point. It forces predictable movement. It puts you in an unstable posture where a sudden loss of balance can be catastrophic. In the dark, it's already a place of heightened risk. Now, imagine that same staircase has been deliberately engineered by a desperate defender. In this deep dive, we are peeling back the floorboards of history to uncover the ingenious and horrifying world of World War II staircase traps. From simple improvised devices to the most chilling, state-sanctioned weaponization of a staircase. This is the story of how war twists the familiar into the fatal. Number 1, the principle of peril. Before we get to the traps themselves, it's crucial to understand the philosophy behind them. The booby trap isn't a weapon of the strong, it's a weapon of the weak and the defending. Throughout World War II, resistance groups like the French Maquis and even ordinary civilians relied on these methods to harass a superior occupying force or defend against looters. The effectiveness of a booby trap is measured in 2 ways: physical and psychological. The physical goal often wasn't to kill, but to maim. A dead soldier is 1 loss. A wounded soldier, however, is a logistical nightmare. He cries out, draining morale. He requires immediate medical attention, pulling 2 or 3 others out of the fight to carry him to safety. A single trap that shatters a leg could neutralize an entire squad for precious minutes. But the psychological impact is where the booby trap truly excels. After encountering just one, a soldier's entire perception of the environment changes. Every door, every object becomes a potential source of death. The goal is to make the enemy feel that there is no safe space. Manuals from Britain's Special Operations Executive, SOE, and America's OSS formalize this warfare, detailing how to turn everyday items into deadly devices. They taught fighters to think like a trapper, identify a target's likely path, exploit their natural behaviors, and use surprise with maximum brutality. A staircase was a textbook location. It's a confined space that forces an intruder into a narrow channel. Their attention is divided, their balance is compromised. While most documented traps involved explosives or tripwires, the logic of improvisation, especially for civilians without access to military-grade supplies, led to cruder, purely mechanical and vicious inventions. The methods were brutal, but in a world where survival was measured day by day, so was the reality. Number 2, the collapsing step. Let's begin with the simplest, most elegant application of this principle, the collapsing step. This design required no explosives, just a saw and a malicious understanding of physics. Picture a scenario. It's late 1944 in a recently vacated French village. Before leaving, a local resistance carpenter spends an hour in the empty home of the town's collaborator mayor. He isn't planting a bomb, he's performing a subtle kind of carpentry. Weeks later, an exhausted German soldier enters the house at dusk. He puts his boot on the first step, solid. Then the second. Then the third. Everything feels normal. He places his boot on the 4th step. For a split second, it feels solid. And then there is a sharp, sickening crack, and the world drops away. And the carpenter hadn't cut the step's support beam all the way through. He had carefully sawn about 90% of the way, leaving just enough wood to create the illusion of integrity. It was a trap designed to pass a cursory touch, but under the full, committed weight of a soldier with his gear, that last sliver of wood was never going to hold. The soldier's leg plunges through the space, and his full body weight comes down with violent, angular momentum. His shin bone, caught against the sharp edge of the broken support, snaps with an audible pop. His scream rips through the quiet house. The trap has worked perfectly. He isn't dead, but he is completely incapacitated. The effect on his squad is immediate. The house is no longer a shelter, it's a threat. The advance halts. The psychological mission is accomplished. That carpenter's trap, made with just a saw, has turned a place of sanctuary into a source of fear, using nothing more than gravity and the fragility of the human body. This was the dark genius of wartime improvisation. Number 3, the tripwire grenade. The collapsing step was brilliantly simple, but for those with access to munitions, the staircase tripwire was a devastating classic. Imagine a farmhouse in the vast emptiness of the Eastern Front, hastily abandoned by retreating Soviet partisans. A German squad, weary from the march, files in to seek shelter from the bitter wind. One of the partisans, a teenager just months ago, had stayed behind for 10 minutes. His tools were a single grenade, a spool of thin wire, and a nail. He hammered the nail into the wooden wall beside the staircase, about 6 inches off the 5th step. To this he secured the grenade, hidden in the shadows. He pulled the pin and rested the armed lever against the nailhead, a precarious balance. Finally, he ran a tripwire from the grenade's body across the dark stairwell to the opposite wall. Now, a German soldier starts up the steps, his rifle slung over his shoulder. In the gloom, he doesn't see the wire. His boot snags it. The tension pulls the grenade away from the nail. The lever, now free, springs open with a sharp ping. 4 seconds later, the world erupts. The blast in the confined stairwell is catastrophic, a channeled explosion of shrapnel and concussive force that rips through the men on the stairs and sends a wave of terror through the rest of the squad. The house is not a shelter. It's a tomb. The partisans' 10 minutes of work has turned the simple act of climbing stairs into a fatal miscalculation. Number 4, the gravity spike. Not everyone had access to military-grade explosives. For a Home Guard volunteer in Coventry, or a factory watchman in London, defense had to be crafted from scrap and debris. This led to traps of pure, vicious physics, like the gravity spike. Consider a small workshop on the outskirts of a city ravaged by the Blitz. The owner has been losing his precious tools to looters. He has no gun, no grenade, but he has a length of steel pipe, a heavy, sharpened iron spike, and a basic understanding of gravity. He rigs the pipe vertically in the dark space above his staircase, pointing straight down. Inside it, he places the spike. It's held in place by a small metal peg, which is attached to a tripwire running across the middle of the staircase. A looter forces the door and, seeing the stairs as his only route to the second-floor office, begins to climb. His foot hits the wire. The peg is yanked free. Above him, the heavy iron spike is released. It doesn't explode. It simply falls, guided by the pipe, accelerating with silent, malevolent purpose. It punches through the wooden step just in front of the looter, or if his timing is just wrong, it punches through his foot or thigh, pinning him to the staircase with an agonizing, bone-shattering impalement. The sheer brutality of it, a primitive, silent spear from above, was often more terrifying than an explosion. It was a message that even without bombs, a defender could turn a simple stairwell into a primitive torture device. Number 6, the Mauthausen, Stairs of Death. The improvised traps of resistance fighters and homeowners were brutal, born of necessity. but they pale in comparison to what happens when the resources and malevolent ideology of a totalitarian state are focused on turning a staircase into an instrument of industrial-scale extermination. For that, we go to the granite quarry of the Mauthausen concentration camp in Austria and the most infamous staircase in history, the Todesstiege, the Stairs of Death. This was not a hidden trap. It was a slow, grinding engine of murder that operated in plain sight. Mauthausen was a Category III camp, where inmates were slated for annihilation through labor. The heart of this policy was the quarry, and its 186 steps. These weren't uniform steps. They were uneven, rugged chunks of rock, slick with mud, and, in winter, ice. Each day, emaciated prisoners were forced to hoist blocks of granite, some weighing over 100 pounds, onto their backs, and begin the climb. SS guards screamed at them to move faster. If a man stumbled, the crushing weight would shift, creating a fatal domino effect. The first man would fall, and the heavy block on his back would crash onto the man below, sending a dozen men tumbling down in an avalanche of broken bodies and stone. The guards looked on, sometimes laughing. This was not an accident. It was part of the system. A prisoner might make this journey 10 times a day. Few survived for more than a few weeks, but the physical torture was matched by sadistic cruelty. The SS guards invented games, like forcing two prisoners to race up the stairs, executing the loser at the top. Near the top of the quarry was a cliff known as the parachutist's wall, where guards would force a group of prisoners to the edge and, at gunpoint, make them choose: be shot or push the man in front of you off. The stairs of death were more than a staircase. They were the physical embodiment of an ideology of extermination. Unlike a hidden booby trap, the horror of the Todesstiege was its visibility, a daily ritual that told every prisoner their life was worthless. It was the ultimate weaponization of architecture. Number 6. The Mauthausen Stairs of Death. The improvised traps of resistance fighters and homeowners were brutal, born of necessity. But they pale in comparison to what happens when the resources and malevolent ideology of a totalitarian state are focused on turning a staircase into an instrument of industrial-scale extermination. For that, we go to the granite quarry of the Mauthausen concentration camp in Austria and the most infamous staircase in history, the Todesstiege, the Stairs of Death. This was not a hidden trap. It was a slow, grinding engine of murder that operated in plain sight. Mauthausen was a Category III camp, where inmates were slated for annihilation through labor. The heart of this policy was the quarry, and its 186 steps. These weren't uniform steps. They were uneven, rugged chunks of rock, slick with mud, and, in winter, ice. Each day, emaciated prisoners were forced to hoist blocks of granite, some weighing over 100 pounds, onto their backs, and begin the climb. SS guards screamed at them to move faster. If a man stumbled, the crushing weight would shift, creating a fatal domino effect. The first man would fall, and the heavy block on his back would crash onto the man below, sending a dozen men tumbling down in an avalanche of broken bodies and stone. The guards looked on, sometimes laughing. This was not an accident. It was part of the system. A prisoner might make this journey 10 times a day. Few survived for more than a few weeks, but the physical torture was matched by sadistic cruelty. The SS guards invented games, like forcing two prisoners to race up the stairs, executing the loser at the top. Near the top of the quarry was a cliff known as the parachutist's wall, where guards would force a group of prisoners to the edge and, at gunpoint, make them choose: be shot or push the man in front of you off. The stairs of death were more than a staircase. They were the physical embodiment of an ideology of extermination. Unlike a hidden booby trap, the horror of the toad stage was its visibility, a daily ritual that told every prisoner their life was worthless. It was the ultimate weaponization of architecture. Number 7, the accidental trap. A staircase didn't need to be deliberately weaponized to become a killer. In the chaos of war, even a staircase designed for safety could become a death trap in seconds. This is the tragic story of the Bethnal Green tube station disaster, a sobering reminder that sometimes the deadliest trap is created not by malice, but by panic. The date was March 3rd, 1943. When the air raid sirens sounded over London's East End, people headed for the Bethnal Green tube station, a trusted underground shelter. On this night, a new sound ripped through the sky, a battery of new anti-aircraft rockets. To the civilians on the street, it sounded like a new and more terrible kind of bomb. The orderly walk to the shelter turned into a panicked surge. The entrance was far from ideal. A steep, narrow staircase of just 19 steps, poorly lit, with no central handrail. As the crowd pushed forward, a woman with a baby stumbled near the bottom. An elderly man tripped over her, creating an instant blockage. But the people at the back couldn't see what had happened. They could only hear the terrifying rockets and feel the pressure of the hundreds behind them. They pushed forward. Within seconds, the small staircase became a solid mass of bodies. The immense pressure from above crushed those at the bottom. They couldn't move. They couldn't breathe. The very air was pressed from their lungs. It was a trap sprung by physics and fear. The narrow staircase, a conduit to safety, had become a funnel of death. 173 people were crushed or asphyxiated, including 62 children. To protect public morale, the British government censored the news. The Bethnal Green disaster stands as a chilling testament that, in wartime, danger lurks not only in enemy weapons, but in the very infrastructure of daily life, booby-trapped by fear itself. From a simple sawed-through step in a French farmhouse, to the industrial horror of the Mauthausen quarry, and finally to the accidental tomb at Bethnal Green, the story of the staircase in World War II is a microcosm of the conflict itself. It shows how the fabric of our world can be unraveled and twisted into something monstrous. The staircase, an object we encounter every day, was transformed. For some, it became a tool of desperate defense, turning an enemy's sense of safety into terror. For others, it became a machine of torture or a fatal funnel of panic. These stories remind us of the dark ingenuity that war forces upon humanity. They show us that the greatest horrors are not always on the battlefield, but are often hidden in the quiet, mundane corners of our world, waiting in the dark at the bottom of a simple flight of stairs.